Patrick sat at his desk the way a man sits at the edge of a long journey's end, careful, quiet, almost afraid to breathe. The chair creaked, the lamp hummed. The pages before him rested in a neat, obedient stack, still warm from the printer, as if the words themselves were alive and waiting to be judged. He had finished it. At least, he had finished something. The clock on the wall ticked with theatrical insistence, each second tapping him on the shoulder like a persistent child. Patrick leaned back, rubbed his eyes, and allowed himself a thin smile. He was in his mid-50s now, hair more silver than red, hands speckled with the quiet evidence of time. Tonight those hands had written what he hoped, no, what he had dared to hope, was the greatest story in the world. It had a hook, a sharp one, the kind that snagged a reader's curiosity and refused to let go. It had metaphors layered like sedimentary rock, each one built upon the last. It had similes that shimmered, life like a river, grief like a bruise, hope like a match struck in the dark. Juxtaposition too, joy beside sorrow, silence beside sound, birth brushing shoulders with death. He had repeated key phrases, let them echo and return, echo and return, echo and return. He had given the wind a voice, let the city sigh, allowed memory to reach out its hands like an old friend. Alliteration danced across the pages in careful clusters. Soft summer skies, bitter, brittle bones, whispering, waiting words. It followed the recommended structure for creative writing perfectly. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Gustav Freytag himself would have nodded in approval. Patrick leaned forward again, fingertips brushing the top page. The paper felt thinner than it should have, fragile, like it might tear if he pressed too hard. A doubt stirred. At first it was small, a seed of uncertainty lodged quietly between two confident thoughts. Then it grew. Doubt had a way of doing that. It let itself in, stretched, yawned, and made itself comfortable. The greatest story in the world? The phrase repeated in his mind, no longer triumphant in tone but taunting. The words stared back at him now, bold and black, as if they were lines of dominoes that could fall at any moment. Can there really be such a thing? Patrick's smile faded. He stood and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain with a slow, tired hand. Outside, the street glistened with recent rain. Street lights cast puddles of gold onto the pavement. Somewhere further down, laughter burst from an open doorway. Somewhere else, an ambulance rushed past, wailing. A few seconds of observation from his window confirmed the world was not a single story. He thought of places he had never been, markets thick with spice and shouting voices, villages where stories were sung instead of written, homes where history lived in gestures and books. He thought of rituals he did not understand, languages he could not speak, customs that had been practiced for centuries before his own ancestors had learned to hold a pen. Patrick felt suddenly, sharply ignorant. How could his story, carefully structured, neatly paced, expertly crafted, stand above all of that? How could it claim greatness when it was born from one life, one desk, one narrow slice of experience? The doubt now grew teeth. He returned to the desk and sat again, posture collapsing inward. The lamp's light seemed harsher now, exposing every flaw, every comma he had questioned, every metaphor that might be too much or not enough. The pages no longer rested peacefully, they judged. The rising action of his own story had been this very moment, he realized. The slow climb of confidence, the belief that skill and structure could build something monumental. He had believed that if he followed the rules closely enough, if he obeyed the architecture of storytelling, the result would be undeniable. But now he stood at a different peak. This was the climax. Patrick closed his eyes. Memory knocked softly at the door of his mind. He saw himself younger, hunched over notebooks, convinced that if he could just find the right words, everything else would make sense. He remembered failures, rejections, quiet victories no one else noticed, long nights, longer doubts. He had been here many times before. Write, rewrite, revise. Hope, doubt, hope again. His heart gathered pace. What if the greatest story wasn't something that could be written at all? The idea landed with the weight of truth, heavy, solid. Patrick opened his eyes and looked not at the pages, but at his hands. These hands had held his children, had buried loved ones, had trembled with fear and steadied with resolve. These hands had lived chapters no outline could fully capture. And so had everyone else. He thought of the woman laughing down the street, of the patient in the ambulance, of the shopkeeper locking up for the night. Each of them carried a story layered with intrigue and conflict, with moments of unbearable climax and quiet, unresolved endings. Stories colliding, stories coexisting, stories contradicting one another. The monumental beside the mundane. Patrick felt something ease inside him. The doubt did not vanish, but it softened, transformed. It was no longer an enemy. It was a guide. He understood now that greatness was not a crown to be claimed by one record. The greatest story in the world was not a single narrative towering above all others. It was the collective symphony of human lives, each one precious, each one incomplete without the rest. A writer could not capture that totality, but a writer could offer truth. One truth, their own. Patrick picked up the first page again, not with pride this time, but with humility. He would keep the structure, he would keep the techniques, he would keep the craft he loved so fiercely, but he would release the impossible ambition of supremacy. He would write his journey with honesty and hope, quietly, sincerely, that somewhere someone might see a moment's reflection of their own story in his. Patrick smiled again, this time deeper, steadier. He gathered the pages, squared the edges, and placed them gently into a folder. Outside, the rain began falling more urgently, tapping the window like applause or maybe encouragement. He could not tell which.